Hello and welcome to our ongoing series of Tarot on videos where I'm covering NLP and Tarot at the moment, and I look forward to discussing NLP, Tarot, Kabbalah, the Western esoteric tradition, and I'm just going to check the comment stream. See if we can get that up and running today. We've had some problems with that over the last couple of videos, so I'm just here we go. So that's good. I can actually see the comments, so that's fine. That's brilliant. It means that we can do a few more things that I wanted to do yesterday, but couldn't because we had the problem with the video comment stream. So I'm going to be covering some more NLP to add to our NLP repertoire. I'm asking you to perhaps look back over the last few videos. There's been some homework for people to do, just to be able to listen to language patterns that we're covering, and then we're slowly going to learn how to build those into our tarot readings as well. So hello to Evelyn, Adela, Michael, hello, thanks for joining us, Evan, Letitia, and many other names that I recognise. Hello to you all. I hope you're keeping very well, safe and sane, and hello to Italy as well. It's very glad to have you here around our sort of virtual campfire. So we've been covering a lot of NLP techniques that we're building up on our little artificial temporary flip chart that I have here. We're going to cover another meta program today, which I'll explain, and also another language pattern for the meta and Milton model we're going to cover. Which is basically about beliefs. And then also I wanted to cover similes and metaphors and symbols, because we quite often, when we're talking about our tarot deck, we refer to these as symbols and reading the symbols, or perhaps responding to symbols, or being intuitive about the symbols. But what is it exactly that we mean by symbolism? What do we mean when we talk in interpreting the symbolism, and how does that apply to our client as well? Because obviously this has to map to our client's life. And we've seen in our beginner videos in particular, if you have a look at the unit section, you'll see that there are at least 2 videos marked as beginner videos that we discuss the structure of the tarot and how that reflects a Kabbalistic model, and how that then in turn reflects any situation in life. There really isn't any situation that I've ever found that cannot be mapped by just a few tarot cards quite accurately, which is why it's such a useful artifact. It is an artifact of our experience in the universe. This little deck of 78 cards is an actual artifact that has arisen to describe our relationship to the universe itself. Now, let's just cover NLP learning for today. We are going to cover another meta program. Now, yesterday, I think we talked about away from and towards. Away from and towards. So away from and towards. We covered. And that's basically describing how some people motivate themselves by moving away from something that they don't want, and how other people motivate themselves more strongly by moving towards something that they do want. And basically we can identify by asking a few simple questions, by listening to the client, describe events in their life situations, and they motivate themselves. And then when we're doing our tarot card reading, we can utilize that. We can incorporate their meta program for away from and towards, and really help deliver the reading in a way that's actually going to motivate them. That's one meta program that we can listen to and then alter our own meta program in order to communicate more effectively and powerfully to that person. The second meta program is it's called self and other, and it's a very powerful one. And I'd like you to consider, as with all NLP techniques, how this applies to you. So there are some people, and it's always easier to hear these things in other people than it is sometimes to realize it in oneself. Some people always refer to themselves when they are trying to process any sort of information, and some people always refer to other people. And so, say for example, if I said to you, oh, I've got a headache, for example. Now, some people will actually say, oh, that must be terrible. I'm sorry to hear that. Would you like a tablet, or can I get you a glass of water, or whatever it might be? Other people might say, oh, I know it's terrible when you have a headache, isn't it? I had one last week and it was awful. I can imagine how you feel because I felt terrible. And they will refer to themselves in order to process the information that you've given them. Other people on the other side, referring to other, will process it sometimes in the sense of, oh, you've got a headache. My aunt used to have headaches a lot and she really suffered with them. I hope it's not as bad as my aunt's headaches. So basically, people can be divided into two categories, two meta programs, self and other. And so go and listen to your partner, go and listen to people talking on the television, go and overhear conversations from a socially appropriate distance, which is, I think, about 2 meters at the moment, and see if you can actually hear whether people are referring to self or referring to other as their natural meta program. Okay, so that's another meta program to add to, away from, and towards. And again, we might not hear all of these in one person immediately in the first 5 minutes, but it is quite interesting that you start to change your questions slightly and change your focus of interest, not in a client describing every single thing about the day that they went to the beach with their family and the problems they have with their family, and that's why they're having the reading, and their uncle and their niece and their nephew and all of their names and what type of ice cream they had. You actually start to listen very differently. And sometimes all of those things will get tuned out. And in fact, you'll end up listening and hearing from an NLP perspective more about the semantic structure of that communication. Are they referring to self or other? Are they demonstrating whether they move away from or towards in terms of their motivation? Because all of that we can dig into and utilize in the tarot reading that we then give them, and it becomes far more powerful. And again, these are all of the sorts of ideas that I introduced in Tarosophy, my first book, where I started to introduce the ideas of NLP into tarot, because it's a powerful way of learning to listen and communicate with clients in what might otherwise be referred to as brief therapy. You sometimes might only see a client the once and have 30 minutes, 45 minutes with them. And so it's far more powerful and more elegant, I think, to adopt a deeper form of communication with the client. Okay, so that's our second meta program, and we're going to start to weave all of these things together as we go through our series of videos. But your homework, as ever, is to listen to other people. Listen to how other people use these things. Now, our next thing that I wanted to add before we go on to similes and symbols in tarot cards is another Meta Milton model. And so we've done, and again, all of these have very fancy names, which I hope in the previous videos we have seen that they actually refer to quite simple things that we can hear. You should have heard a lot of them by now. You should have heard a lot of them by now, because everyone can hear universal quantifiers, even if they can't remember that they're called universal quantifiers. They're used all of the time. What else have we done? Nominalizations. The learning that you're receiving is to be treasured. The learning that you're receiving should be treasured. So the learning is a complex process. It's not a thing. But I can say, the learning that you're getting is worth its weight in gold. And I refer to the learning because I'm making a nominalization of learning. On the flip side, we can do that with other things when we refer to the Milton model, which helps us utilize these things to the person in a more elegant way, where we say, for example, in a hypnotic or hypnotherapeutic context, I might say to someone, and as you relax and as you deeply go into a trance, blah, 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 the learning that your mind can provide you in many different ways is remarkable to know how that learning can now come from all of your experience and knowledge, whether conscious or unconscious. The learning comes now. And it's easy to know that when that learning is most powerful, it is easily remembered, because there are times when we forget to remember just how important those things that we have learnt can be to help us change. Because the learning happens whether we are aware or forget, or even remember sometimes to forget those things that you can forget to learn, because it is already the learning happening now. And so we can weave our language patterns and normalize learning in that context. And then that allows the unconscious to process whatever relevant learning is required without even knowing the content of the issue. We can unlock all of that from the unconscious to make it far more powerful. Bandler used to say that either you start at the top and let it filter down, or you go right to the bottom and let it filter up. But you don't try and hit people specifically in the middle. That's not the sort of NLP way. So we've done modal operators, should, could, would, might, can't, universal quantifiers, all, nobody, never, ever, nominalizations, the thing that cannot be named. And today I want to introduce complex equivalences. And again, one of the fancy names, but actually it's a very simple thing. It's basically a belief. I really refer to beliefs as complex equivalences. And it's basically when it's used in the meta model side of things, when someone has placed a curse, and you'll recognize this as soon as I say it, John doesn't like me. Okay, John doesn't like me is a complex equivalency. In fact, it's another language pattern violation, but we'll come on to that later, because John doesn't like me because why? And there's an equivalency from John's behavior, or what he's said, to the belief. And it's a complex equivalence. There is no such thing really as John doesn't like me. That's a statement, but it's an interpretation, a bit like we say that this card is about saving money. It's a complex equivalence because this card isn't money and we're not saving it. And if you were symbol blind, if such a thing existed, which I guess it does for some people, then this card, it would be meaningless to say that this has got anything to do with saving money. Luckily enough, when we go into a film, for example, and watch a film, where most of us fairly aware that what is happening on the screen has something to tell us, we don't sit there thinking, why am I sitting in this room watching these people do these things? It has nothing to do with me. I've no idea why I'm even watching them do these things that is just made up on the screen. It makes no sense to me. It's a big flat screen. There are people moving on it. They are saying things. It has no meaning. So we do make a complex equivalency all of the time, and that's very powerful. So one complex equivalency is John doesn't like me because he shouted at me. And that may be true, but it is something in our meta model side of things. When we unpick the curse and break it down, we might say, why do you think that? Why do you think that John doesn't like you? What does John do that tells you that he doesn't like you? How did you come to understand that John doesn't like you? All of these sort of counseling type questions are very important because they're modeled on Virginia Satir and Milton Erickson's brilliant language patterns with unpicking people's belief systems. So when a client comes for a tarot reading and they tell you about somebody in their relationships, say, for example, they're having a problem with their boss at work and they want a reading about how to deal with the situation. And they might say something like, my boss is jealous of me. Then it's worth noting that this is a complex equivalency. And we might want to ask, in just briefly, can you just tell me a few of the things I'm not seeing through your eyes, and I might see things very differently. Could you tell me a couple of the things that have led you to believe that your boss is jealous of you? And then you'll get some actual factual observations that aren't interpretations. And it could be that the boss is angry, or the boss is threatened, or the boss is all sorts of things, but the person has interpreted that in a particular way. And knowing the observations that they have based that on is very useful for our tarot card reading, because then we can say, so when your boss does such and such, as you've told me that they do, perhaps it is because they are trying to save their resources or save money. And then we can actually refer to the deep level of what's happening, i.e., the things that are actually happening, rather than the person's interpretation of that, which it doesn't matter if it's true or not, because it is a belief. It's a complex equivalence that we need to go underneath to get a really powerful tarot reading for them. Now, another way is, for example, when we fasten cause and effects together with the meta model. I'll still go on the meta model side. You hear politicians do this an awful lot. They make complex equivalences. My favorite a little while ago, which is sort of fairly relevant at the moment during this pandemic, was a few years ago. I was hearing someone, a politician, start to talk about closing a hospital, and they were closing a hospital, and they said something along these lines. They said, well, as we know, hospitals are they're like the service stations on the freeway, on the motorway in the UK. So they're like service stations on a motorway. And basically, you need them. They have to be there. They're really welcome when you get to them. And we place them apart so that they're there when you need them, so that you never run out of petrol. And, and like service stations, it's pointless building one on top of another. You don't need them every 30 feet on the motorway, obviously. So it is with regret that we will have to close this hospital, and, so on and so on, and carried on talking. Now, the thing is yes, hospitals may be like service stations in one regard, that it's very useful to have them when you need them. They may be like service stations in another regard, that when you get to one, you can then refuel and go a while on your journey before you need one again. But they are not like service stations in the fact that it doesn't make sense to have one service station right next to another in close proximity, but that doesn't necessarily apply to hospitals. There, the complex equivalency is not necessarily the case. It breaks down. It's not the same. But using complex equivalencies allow politicians in particular, salespeople in particular, to really make what appears to be a very good and reasonable point, but the moment you break it down from surface to deep structure, it falls apart entirely, and you can call them out on that. Um, and I've had that happen to me in business meetings, in sales meetings, in all sorts of places where someone has tried to use a complex equivalency to prove a point that is totally invalid. It breaks down. Okay, so that is a complex equivalency. So I'd like you to also add that to your list of things to listen to, complex equivalencies, when people use those. Now, in the Milton model, the other side of this equation, where we want to use complex equivalencies to weave a spell or to make a more persuasive language pattern to someone, we might say you need to save your money because, and now we use a complex equivalency, because it's important to have things to stand on. Now, it is important to have things to stand on, and it is important to save money, but the two things are not necessarily related. We are making a complex equivalency whenever we talk about applying a card to someone's life. Does that make sense? That it's a belief, an interpretation, a mapping from one thing to another. But it's very powerful because the person can say, it's important to hold on to your resources, as it's very important that this man has worked so hard at gaining them. And we can see perhaps that the man has worked hard. We can see it's a symbol of such. But for all we know, in the picture, he could have stolen them and he could be hiding them from the law. We don't know that. But when we make the complex equivalence, we make a powerful communication that is very difficult to consciously interpret or censor. So the unconscious just goes, yes, it is important to have something to stand on, and therefore it is also important to save my money. Okay. It's important once you made a decision to stick to it, just as you hold the sword straight once you've decided to hold it. This is a complex equivalency between holding a symbolic sword and holding straight to your will and your beliefs and your decisions. And we want to bind those very carefully. Now, just to explain that a bit further, we are going to talk about symbols. Symbols we have here, and the difference between similes and metaphors. And then we're going to look at a couple of tarot cards and explore them in terms of similes and metaphors. So let me get these two cards again. We'll take these two cards. Now, a symbol is just anything that points to something other than itself. So a coin is a symbol of money, or it could be a symbol of time or hard work or resources. It can point to many things. That's what's called multivalency. It can have many meanings, many values. A crown is a symbol Holding your hands in this position is a symbol. The city is a symbol, as we've seen in invisible cities. His feet, the throne, all of these things, even the number 9 or the grey colour of the sky, all of these things are symbols. So we have symbols on this card as well. Okay, and this is what is known as symbolism. It's interpreting symbols to what they point to, like a dream has symbols. And we interpret those for things in our actual life and experience. Now, a metaphor is more complex. So, well, let's start with a simile. A simile is, I made a couple of notes to remind myself, your something is like something else. So your anxiety is like a stone, is like a weight. Your responsibility is a big weight on your shoulders, is a simile, because it's a very simple, complex equivalence. Your responsibility is a big weight on your shoulders. It's as easy as falling off a log. And these things are very simple, okay? They're referring one thing to another. A metaphor is, in effect, either a set of symbols, like so a card is an illustrative metaphor. This is not a symbol, this is a metaphor, because we have a hand, it's holding a sword, there are Hebrew yod symbols, there's a crown, there's laurel hanging off it, all sorts of things. There's the words ace of swords, there are mountains. This is a whole complex metaphor, okay? So it's not a simile. The sword might be a simile. That decision cut, what you said, cut me like a knife, is a simile. The words that someone have said on one side, cut me like a knife. That's a simile. They are two similar things that you are referring to. A metaphor is a complex amount of things. The metaphors, unlike similes, might be life is like what? Life is like a box of chocolates. Life is like a journey. Now that is a metaphor because it's more complex. Life is like a journey, not in one way, but in lots of different ways. Life is like a box of chocolates, not just in one way that you never know what you'll get, but also in a lot of other ways. My relationship is like an ocean, will be a more of a metaphor. So it's a more complex range of complex equivalences between the two things. So we move between cliches, between aphorisms, between similes, between symbols and metaphors, or just the moment we say this card symbolizes or this card means that you've really got to make a decision soon. This card, this physical piece of paper, means we're making a complex equivalence and we're using a simile and a metaphor to make a decision. So does that make sense? We are making maps between what we're seeing here to someone's life in order to weave all of these different levels of similes, which are this coin is your money, is a simile. The coin represents money. It's a very similar thing. But the symbolism of the card means sayings because it's a metaphor. Okay? So it's a metaphor. And that allows us to then weave these things, these complex equivalences using our Milton model side of things in more powerful statements. So I might say, success, this card shows your success. But like the man on the horse, which is the sum total of what has carried you so far. So now the horse is the sum total of what has carried you so far, not the man in the picture, but you, the client, the person. But success, like the horse that has carried you so far, has to be maintained. And like the man holding the wand here, and if you look, you can see how he is observing the crowd, being very cautious. It's as if he is ready for the horse to bolt and not quite trusting himself on the horse. Now, when I say he is not quite trusting himself on the horse, because I've made a complex equivalence with the horse and the person's what has carried them so far, in effect, I'm telling their unconscious that the client, isn't trusting their own success so far. They are not ready to rest their laurels. And I might then later say, so it may be that the man is not yet ready to rest his laurels. And so it's very important for him, like any good rider, to keep his hands on the reins and his eye on the crowd to ensure that you safely get to where you're going. And I'll switch from him to you and make that slight identity adjustment in order to then refer everything in the card to the other person. And of course, you'll do this automatically, I'm sure, now when you listen to yourself speaking in a reading or watch a YouTube video of someone doing a reading. If they're any good, they'll be very able to turn similes, metaphors, and symbols into identifiable conscious and unconscious interpretations as they go through. And it's a very powerful way of communicating as well. Okay, does that make sense? So I wanted to introduce the whole language of the difference between simile, symbol, metaphor, and also introduce the idea of complex equivalency, because that is all part of where we're going to go over the next few days with our NLP and applying it to our tarot card readings. And I hope you can see just a few little things that I've done there that you can listen to. And again, this is the importance with this whole series of NLP classes that we're doing, that it gives you more things to listen to. It's very important to practice by listening. It's the best way of learning, because it's your brain is a sponge and it will just soak things up. See what I did there? Okay, so I want you to listen to people, and in NLP, when we do, say, for example, the practitioner course, and introduce all of the language patterns, of which there's, I guess, between 12 and 15 in total, the main ones, the most useful ones. Probably there's about 4 that are most useful, but you never know which 4 with a client are going to be the most useful. Then you're sort of told to go away and practice for about a week listening for just one. So spend a whole week listening for universal quantifiers, spend a whole week listening for nominalizations, and so on. Okay. So as Diane's saying, NLP allows a query into a lot of involvement. Well, it does and it doesn't, in the sense of Milton Erickson actually used to say that he viewed all of the information he got from the unconscious by listening to language patterns, non-verbal cues, eye movement, body language, nuances in tone, and so on. He used to actually say that he viewed that as what in counseling terms or therapeutic terms is called privileged information. That is, it was privileged between him as the therapist and the client's unconscious, and not to be given to the client, because otherwise the unconscious would have actually made it conscious. And the fact that it was unconscious to the client, the fact that they didn't know that they sounded like a 4-year-old every time they talked about their father, was privileged information between the unconscious telling Erickson that they regressed to a 4-year-old part of them when they were talking about their relationship to their father, for example. And Erickson wouldn't say to the client, I noticed that you regressed to a 4-year-old when you talk about your father. He would incorporate and utilize that, but he would view it as his conversation with the client's unconscious. And sometimes there are experiences using this approach where you have no idea what is going on because you allow the unconscious to really take over. Just as a side to that, I call that walking in emptiness. And it's a very powerful feeling when you're working with a client in that way. And sometimes you get it in tarot card reading as well with divination. One of the things that a good example was a client came to me once, and this is a story I'm telling in NLP. When does one come out sounding good? Keep it in the toolkit. Or when was it sounding good? Keep it in the toolkit. So Evan's just saying, shall we have certain metaphors and similar set up? It's best to do it on the spot, but also you will find yourself referring to certain things constantly with certain cards. So your language pattern will build up all of the time. And it comes to this art form, really, rather than the science of it, a sort of art form of being able to extend your metaphors and similes across the board. And also to know which ones your client uses. If your client is a Star Wars fan and you know some Star Wars stuff, then go ahead and use those as complex equivalences. As Yoda would say, there is no trying, only do. So we can utilize our the broader range of metaphors and similes that we can draw on. There are some books, and I've listed at least one of them in my reading list, which is on the webpage, I think on my Marcus Katz webpage, that have collections of therapeutic metaphors. And it sounds a bit lame to go and find them, but there are a lot of very powerful metaphors of change and success and motivation and so on that you can at least use as a basis for your own. So certain little stories, certain stories, fables and so forth that talk about success, confidence, healing, recovery, and so on. They're good starters. So if you Google therapeutic metaphors, you'll find some good examples to spark your own imagination and your own background and knowledge. Okay. Now, yes, I'm just talking about this relationship between the unconscious and the conscious. I was going to briefly tell the story of a client who came to me, and she was a very high-powered business person. She ran her own business. She came to me. I actually went to her place to start sessions with her, and she spoke to me for about 10 minutes, and I had no idea what she was talking about. So she told very in detail all sorts of things, but I had no idea why, what was going on, and what she wanted to do or anything. And I thought, this is very strange. So I asked a few more questions, tried to use all of my language skills and so on to find out what the hell was going on. Listened very carefully with all of my sensory acuity and years of training and so on and so on. Nothing at all. I still had no idea. And then I was reminded after about 10 minutes of my main thing from Erickson, which is incorporate and utilize. And so she stopped talking for a brief moment, and I looked at her and I just said, and So I just ignored basically what she was saying, and I carried on with the linking word, which was the word and, as if I was picking up from what she was saying. And she finished talking, just took a breath to carry on, and I said, and what is it like to have paid someone to be in a room with you who has no idea what to do? And I just held her gaze and held my own state. And I was absolutely authentic and honest. And I asked her, I utilized that state, I incorporated my own state of not knowing what to do. And I said, and what is it like for you to be in a room with someone who has no idea what to do? And I just looked at her, and she looked at me, she stopped dead. It was bold, but quite often in this field, you can do very bold things, make very strong interventions. It's not like other forms of counselling or therapeutic approach, certainly not the way I do it. And after a moment, she just closed her eyes. And I carried on looking at her, and a minute passed. And I thought, well, I know she knows I'm a hypnotherapist, so I assume she's waiting for me to say something like, you are feeling sleepy or something like that. And I just thought, well, I still don't know what to do, so I'll hold the state. And for 50 minutes at the most terrifying time of my life, I think, because my conscious mind was going to say something. She's going to open her eyes any second now and just ask for her money back, or say you're a fraud, or something. And my unconscious was just going, hold, 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 steady, hold, not yet. And that went on for 50 minutes. And about 50 minutes, and strangely enough, the proper therapeutic hour, she just opened her eyes and said, yeah, I think you're right. And I went, that's right. And I left. And for about a week, I was completely nonplussed. I knew something powerful had happened, but I had no idea what. And that's that sort of, as Lily is asking, it's conducting a relationship sometimes with your own unconscious and their unconscious, absolutely in the raw. I think all therapy and counselling, obviously, all communication involves those two things far more than by conscious by definition, but actually to hold it is walking in emptiness. That's really where Erickson excelled, and part of my inspiration for the style that I adopt as well. And about a week later, the lady phoned me up, and I thought maybe she's either going to ask for her money back, or maybe she's phoning for another appointment to get it right this time or something. And bizarrely enough, she said, my husband has asked me to phone you to tell you that whatever you did, thank you very much. And I said, it's a pleasure. And I just waited a moment, and she said, yeah, I realized with what you told me, and I thought I didn't tell her anything, that I really needed to just let go of my control issue, that I needed to not have these high expectations of myself and just take a step back. And, as you gave me the advice, I need to spend an hour, like maybe 50 minutes every day, just doing nothing. And my husband just remarked on just how different I am now, and so on. So I'm going to keep doing that. And I said, that's right. Thank you for telling me. And I was very grateful that she did let me know that that her unconscious had provided her all of that information. But from a therapeutic point of view, from a counselling point of view, this is what we do sometimes. We have no idea the impact of talking about the symbolism sometimes. So it's sometimes far more powerful not to be clever, not to demonstrate how much you know, not to try and get it one over on the client or take their agency away from them. It's always the opposite. One of my therapeutic supervisors once asked me, and I knew it was a trick question. She said, "What's the relationship between the responsibility of change with the client or with you as the sort of would-be therapist?" And I thought, oh, this is a trick question. And I thought, it's not 100% me. I know that. So it's 50. And she went, no, it's 100% the clients, and just cut me off. And I think the more vague you can be, the more elegant you can be with your similes, your metaphors, your symbolism, then you can allow the card to also speak deeply to the unconscious of the client. And that is where sometimes the true magic of the symbolism actually works. Okay? So again, that's sort of why I wanted to talk about similes, metaphors, and so on. And now we can come to our bedtime story, if we're ready for this. Italo Calvino, Invisible Cities. I've been loving reading from this every evening, and we will move on to something else perhaps next week. Here in the UK, I think we're at least due another week of lockdown, so we're certainly going to be carrying on with these for a little while yet. And I have a Philip K. Dick story to read to you next weekend as our full-on bedtime story. But in the meantime, in the section on cities and memory, which may or may not have something to do with what we're talking about, we shall read about Maurilia, the city of Maurilia. Because in Maurilia, the traveller is invited to visit the city and at the same time to examine some old postcards that show how it used to be. The same identical square with a hen in the place of the bus station. On one postcard, a bandstand in the place of what is now the overpass. Two young ladies with white parasols in the place of the munitions factory. If the traveller does not wish to disappoint the inhabitants, he must praise the postcard city and prefer it to the present one, although he must also be careful to contain his regret at the changes within definite limits. Admitting that the magnificence and prosperity of the metropolis Maurilia, when compared to the old provincial Maurilia, cannot compensate for a certain lost grace, which, however, can be appreciated only now in the old postcards. Whereas before, when that provincial Maurilia was before one's eyes, one saw absolutely nothing graceful and would see even less today if Maurilia had remained unchanged. And in any case, the metropolis has that added attraction. Although what it has become, one can look with nostalgia back at what it was. Beware of saying to them that sometimes different cities follow one another on the same site and under the same name, born and without knowing one another, without communication among themselves. At times, even the names of the inhabitants remain the same, and their voices accent, and also the features of their faces. But the gods who live beneath names and above places have gone off without a word, and outsiders have settled in their place. It is pointless to ask whether the new ones are better or worse than the old, since there is no connection between them, just as the old postcards do not depict Maurilia as it was, but a different city, which by chance was called Maurilia, like this one. The city of Maurilia in the section Cities and Memory in Italo Calvino, Invisible Cities. And perhaps that does have a connection with our memory and the connection of our past and present. So with that bedtime story in mind, I bid you adieu for this evening, and we will convene again in the same place tomorrow at 9 p.m. British Summer Time and continue on and look at some application of some of our language patterns that I hope you can listen to and practice, ready for applying them to our tarot card readings with even more detail between the cards. Okay, thanks a lot, and look after yourselves and close to you. Bye for now. Okay, it looks as if this may still be live, so just 1 second. Let me see if I can actually switch this off, which would be great. Okay, so perhaps I can read another story out while that's interesting. It's not done that before.